Welcome everyone. Tonight we're stepping inside one of the most glamorous and dangerous mansions in American history. The Canfield, a place where unimaginable wealth, political power, and secret deals collided under crystal chandeliers. This isn't just a story about a building. It's about ambition, corruption, and how one man's rise turned into a spectacular fall that shocked the nation. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe. A lot of time and effort goes into digging through real records, forgotten archives, and true historical accounts to bring these stories to life exactly as they happened. The story of the Canfield begins at the height of America's Gilded Age, a time when money could bend laws, reputations were bought, and excess was seen as proof of success. Long before it became infamous, the Canfield was conceived as something entirely new, not merely a mansion, not merely a casino, but a palace designed to lure the most powerful men in America into a world where temptation ruled and consequences rarely followed. Its creation was deliberate, calculated, and unapologetically extravagant. When Richard Canfield acquired the land in Saratoga Springs, New York, the town was already known as a playground for the wealthy. Railroad tycoons, industrial barons, and political elites flocked there every summer, drawn by mineral springs and elite social gatherings. Canfield saw something others did not, an opportunity to dominate this world by giving its most powerful figures exactly what they desired, wrapped in luxury so refined it felt untouchable. He envisioned a structure that would intimidate, seduce, and impress the moment someone stepped through its doors. Construction began in the early 1870s, and no expense was spared. Imported marble, rare hardwoods, and hand-carved stonework were brought in from across the country and Europe. The mansion was designed in the grand Second Empire style, with towering mansard roofs, sweeping staircases, and ornate balconies that overlooked manicured grounds. Everything about the building screamed authority and wealth. The goal was simple: anyone who entered the Canfield would feel smaller, humbler, and more willing to lose themselves within its walls. Inside, the mansion was even more breathtaking. Gas-lit chandeliers illuminated rooms layered with velvet drapes, gold trim, and mirrored walls that reflected wealth back at its guests from every angle. The casino floor itself was hidden behind elegance, gambling tables arranged like works of art, staffed by dealers trained not only in games but in discretion. Here, fortunes could be lost without a word ever leaving the room. Canfield understood that secrecy was just as valuable as luxury, and he built both into the mansion's very bones. What truly set the Canfield apart from ordinary gambling houses was its exclusivity. This was not a place for the public. Entry was by invitation only, and those invitations were extended carefully. Politicians, financiers, military officers, and foreign dignitaries found themselves welcomed into an environment where rules were flexible and indulgence was encouraged. The mansion quickly became a crossroads of power. Deals were whispered over brandy, elections were influenced at card tables, and alliances were formed between spins of the roulette wheel. The mansion's design served a darker purpose as well. Hidden corridors allowed staff and trusted associates to move unseen. Private rooms offered discretion for high-stakes games and personal negotiations. Thick walls muffled sound, ensuring that what happened inside the Canfield stayed inside. It was a place built not just for pleasure, but for control. Every detail reinforced Canfield's authority as the unseen king of his domain. As words spread, the Canfield's reputation grew. To be invited inside was a sign that you mattered. To gamble there meant you were trusted or dangerous. Newspapers hinted at its splendor without ever fully revealing what took place within its walls. This mystery only enhanced its allure. The mansion became a symbol of the era itself, dazzling on the surface, morally hollow beneath. Richard Canfield's genius lay in understanding human weakness. He didn't simply offer gambling, he offered escape. The Canfield promised freedom from scrutiny, from consequence, from restraint. Men who shaped the nation's future sat beneath painted ceilings and risked everything for the thrill of winning or the comfort of believing they were untouchable. The mansion fed that illusion perfectly. By the time the Canfield reached its peak, it was no longer just a building, it was an institution. Its walls had witnessed triumphs and ruin, laughter and despair, loyalty and betrayal. And yet, for all its grandeur, the seeds of destruction were already present. The same ambition that built the Canfield would one day bring it down. But in its earliest days, as its doors opened to America's elite, it stood as a monument to unchecked power, a glittering palace where the line between success and downfall was blurred by velvet, wine, and chance. Richard Canfield's rise to power was not sudden, nor was it accidental. It was the product of sharp intelligence, calculated risk, and an uncanny ability to read people long before they revealed their intentions. Born in 1855, Canfield grew up watching a rapidly changing America, where fortunes were made overnight and lost just as quickly. From an early age, he understood one essential truth of the Gilded Age: money followed confidence, and confidence followed the illusion of control. Gambling, he realized, was not about luck, it was about psychology. Before the Canfield mansion ever existed, Richard Canfield made his name in smaller, rougher gambling houses. These were not glamorous places, but they were profitable classrooms. He learned how men behaved when they believed they were winning, and how desperate they became when they were losing. He noticed that powerful men hated public humiliation, but craved private indulgence. Where other gamblers relied on chance, Canfield relied on discipline. He avoided alcohol at the tables, kept meticulous records, and surrounded himself with people who understood silence was more valuable than loyalty. By his early 20s, Canfield had already separated himself from ordinary casino operators. He was clean, polished, and deliberate, a stark contrast to the rowdy image of gambling halls at the time. He dressed impeccably, spoke calmly, and never appeared rushed. This image made wealthy patrons feel safe. They trusted him, even when they shouldn't have. He didn't chase customers, he made them feel chosen. And in a society obsessed with status, that feeling was intoxicating. Canfield's true brilliance lay in his ability to turn vice into sophistication. Gambling, under his control, became refined entertainment rather than reckless indulgence. He banned rowdy behavior, enforced strict decorum, and removed anyone who threatened the atmosphere of quiet power he cultivated. This wasn't just about manners, it was strategy. By removing chaos, he made risk feel manageable, even elegant. Men who would never step into a back alley gambling den willingly placed fortunes on his tables because it felt respectable to do so. As his reputation grew, so did his clientele. Wealthy businessmen, railroad magnates, and political figures began to seek him out. Many arrived curious, some skeptical, but nearly all left impressed. Canfield remembered names, preferences, and personal weaknesses. He knew when to let a guest win just enough to feel confident, and when to tighten the odds without raising suspicion. He never flaunted his power. Instead, he allowed others to believe they were in control, even as he quietly guided every outcome. When he set his sights on Saratoga Springs, it was a calculated move. The town was already a magnet for America's elite, but it lacked a single figure who truly controlled its gambling scene. Canfield saw an opening by positioning himself not as a gambler, but as a host. He elevated his role. He wasn't inviting people to gamble. He was inviting them into his world. The Canfield mansion would become the physical manifestation of his philosophy: luxury, secrecy, and authority wrapped in elegance. As the mansion rose, so did Canfield's influence. Invitations to the Canfield became social currency. To be welcomed there meant access to power, connections, and indulgence unavailable anywhere else. Politicians quietly attended, knowing that what happened inside would never appear in print. Deals were discussed over cards. Alliances formed between spins of the wheel. Canfield positioned himself at the center of it all, not as a participant, but as the orchestrator. Despite his immense success, Canfield maintained an almost unsettling composure. He rarely celebrated victories and showed little emotion during losses. This restraint fed his legend. People didn't just respect him, they feared him. He seemed untouchable, immune to scandal, always one step ahead of authorities and rivals alike. Even law enforcement hesitated to challenge him directly, aware of the powerful figures who enjoyed his hospitality. Yet beneath the calm exterior was relentless ambition. Canfield believed that power was something you either expanded or lost. He reinvested constantly, refining the mansion, upgrading security, improving the experience for his guests. He understood that complacency was fatal in a world built on indulgence. The Canfield wasn't just a casino. It was a throne room, and Richard Canfield sat at its center with quiet authority. By the height of his reign, Richard Canfield was no longer just a gambler or businessman. He was a symbol of the Gilded Age itself, polished, powerful, and morally untethered. His rise proved that in America's most extravagant era, control didn't belong to those with the loudest voices, but to those who understood human desire. And while his empire appeared unshakable, the very qualities that built his power, secrecy, excess, and ambition, were already laying the foundation for his eventual fall. At the height of its power, the Canfield was not just a casino mansion. It was a private universe where America's elite shed their public faces. The guests who crossed its threshold were not ordinary gamblers looking for excitement. They were senators, judges, industrial tycoons, railroad kings, military officers, and foreign dignitaries, men whose names shaped laws, markets, and wars arrived through discreet entrances, often under cover of night, knowing that what happened inside would never be spoken of outside those walls. The Canfield offered something priceless to people like them: absolute discretion. Inside the mansion, hierarchy dissolved in subtle ways. Titles were rarely spoken. A senator might sit beside a financier who secretly bankrolled his campaign, both pretending to be equals while the cards were dealt. Champagne flowed freely, cigars burned slowly, and conversation drifted effortlessly between politics, business, and personal vice. These were not casual talks. Decisions that affected thousands of lives were whispered between bets. Railroad routes were discussed while roulette wheels spun. Stock manipulations were planned while fortunes changed hands. The casino tables became negotiation desks, and chance served as a convenient mask for intent. Richard Canfield understood that power thrived in comfort. He curated every detail of his guests' experience to keep them relaxed, indulgent, and open. Private rooms existed for those who required more secrecy. Rooms without windows, soundproofed and guarded, where high-stakes games ran through the night. In these rooms, debts weren't always paid in cash. Favors replaced money. Promises replaced contracts. A lost hand might mean a political favor owed, a law softened, an investigation delayed. No paper trail ever existed. That was the genius of it. Alongside these secret deals were crimes that never reached courtrooms. Cheating accusations disappeared. Assaults were quietly settled. Men who lost more than they could afford sometimes vanished from public life entirely, their financial ruin disguised as retirement or relocation. It was rumored that some guests never left the Canfield the way they arrived. Servants spoke in hushed tones of men, escorted out through back corridors at dawn, broken, pale, and silent. Whether their destruction was financial, reputational, or physical was never clear, only that it was final. The mansion itself was designed to facilitate this shadow world. Hidden passageways allowed trusted staff to move unseen. Doors led to rooms that did not appear on any official floor plan. Thick walls swallowed sound, ensuring that screams, arguments, or confessions never traveled far. Canfield invested heavily in loyalty, paying his inner circle well and making sure they understood that betrayal meant total ruin. Silence was not requested. It was enforced through fear and dependency. Women were also part of the Canfield's darker reality, though their stories rarely survived. Some arrived as companions, others as entertainers, and many as commodities traded silently between powerful men. Scandals involving these women were buried before they could surface. Pregnancies vanished. Reputations were destroyed or reshaped at will. The Canfield functioned as a machine that consumed secrets and produced obedience. Those who benefited from it protected it fiercely. Law enforcement knew about the mansion's activities, but knowledge did not equal power. Attempts to investigate often stalled mysteriously. Officers were reassigned. Judges ruled cases inadmissible. Witnesses suddenly refused to testify. Canfield's guest list was his shield. Too many influential men had too much to lose if the truth came out. The Canfield was not protected by law. It controlled it indirectly. What made the mansion especially dangerous was the illusion of safety it provided. Guests believed they were immune within its walls. That indulgence there carried no consequences. That belief led to recklessness. Men gambled more than they could afford. They spoke more freely than they should have. They trusted Canfield and each other in ways that would later haunt them. The mansion recorded everything, not on paper, but in memory, leverage, and unspoken debt. Over time, the Canfield became less a place of entertainment and more a vault of secrets. Everyone inside was compromised in some way, and everyone knew it. This mutual vulnerability created a fragile balance. As long as the mansion stood and Canfield remained in control, silence held. But beneath the polished floors and velvet curtains, pressure was building. Rival gamblers resented his dominance. Reformers began pushing back against corruption. Newspapers grew bolder, and some guests, ruined beyond repair, began to talk. The same secrecy that protected the Canfield also made it dangerous. When truth has nowhere to go, it doesn't disappear, it waits. And by the time cracks began to form in the mansion's perfect facade, The list of hidden crimes, secret deals, and destroyed lives was too long to contain forever. The Canfield had risen on discretion and indulgence, but those very qualities were turning into its greatest liability. What had once been a fortress of power was slowly becoming a prison of secrets, and every man inside it knew that when the fall came, it would be spectacular. The Canfield mansion's fame and notoriety were fueled not just by its opulence, but by the tangled web of politics, money, and corruption that Richard Canfield cultivated with meticulous care. He understood that wealth alone was not enough to make a man untouchable. Influence was the true currency of power. Every guest who crossed the threshold was carefully chosen, and each encounter was an opportunity to forge alliances, gather secrets, and consolidate control over both local and national affairs. What happened inside the mansion rarely remained private, yet only Canfield controlled which truths would leak and which would remain buried. Political power was the most subtle and dangerous tool at Canfield's disposal. Governors, senators, and even members of the judiciary frequented the mansion, often under the guise of leisure. Deals were struck in whispered tones over card tables and in secluded parlors, invisible to the public eye. Votes could be influenced, legislation quietly manipulated, and political careers shaped by the sway of a well-placed bet or a seemingly innocuous favor. Canfield's genius lay in creating the perfect illusion to outsiders. It was a luxurious retreat. To insiders, it was a hub of leverage and quiet coercion. Money, of course, was the lifeblood of the mansion, but Canfield's approach elevated it beyond mere gambling. He ensured that debts, winnings, and losses created webs of obligation that reinforced his control. A man who lost a fortune at the Canfield might owe more than money, loyalty, favors, silence, or political compliance. This system allowed Canfield to extend his influence far beyond the boundaries of Saratoga Springs. Even wealthy men with vast empires could be entangled in invisible chains, all without a single official record of their subjugation. Corruption was woven seamlessly into the Canfield experience. The mansion operated above the law, not because laws didn't exist, but because those who enforced them were often the very people who frequented its halls. Local law enforcement turned a blind eye, judges dismissed cases, and politicians ignored rumors, all because they had something at stake. Canfield's understanding of human nature allowed him to exploit greed, vanity, and ambition to maintain an ecosystem where accountability was nearly impossible. Everyone within the mansion's orbit became complicit, whether they realized it or not. The mansion's elite guests were also a source of fascination for Canfield. By studying their behaviors, weaknesses, and desires, he was able to craft experiences that bound them psychologically as well as financially. Private rooms, hidden gaming chambers, and carefully orchestrated social events ensured that each visitor felt special, chosen, respected, and protected, even as they were slowly drawn deeper into his network of influence. The sense of exclusivity amplified the mansion's power. Those who were invited were grateful. Those who were excluded were envious, and everyone else feared the consequences of stepping too close. The Canfield became a cultural and social landmark because it represented more than wealth. It represented opportunity, danger, and social ascension all in one. Men and women who visited could negotiate contracts, settle disputes, or gain favors that would be impossible elsewhere. In this environment, social and political hierarchies were both reinforced and subverted. Friendships, partnerships, and alliances were formed not in public offices or courtrooms, but behind velvet curtains and beneath gaslit chandeliers. Canfield's influence was not overt, but it was absolute. Yet the same entanglement of politics, money, and corruption that elevated the mansion also sowed the seeds of its vulnerability. Rivals and reformers could see the delicate network of obligation and leverage, and they recognized that dismantling it would be a matter of exposing a few key truths. Journalists and investigators became aware of whispers that could no longer be contained. Laws that were once easily navigated now threatened exposure, and even the loyalty of high-profile guests was not guaranteed. Canfield's success had made the mansion legendary, but it had also made it a target. What made this period in the mansion's history particularly notable was the way it mirrored the Gilded Age itself, a time when social appearances often masked moral decay, and when the accumulation of power often depended more on secrecy and manipulation than on overt leadership. The Canfield was not just a reflection of its owner's cunning, it was a microcosm of the era, a place where fortune, ambition, and corruption collided in a dazzling yet dangerous spectacle. The mansion's halls were full of whispers and deals, but for all its glamour, there was always an undercurrent of tension. Every agreement struck, every debt incurred, and every secret observed added pressure to an already precarious social ecosystem. Canfield's empire was built on influence, and influence was never permanent. The very forces that made the mansion so formidable, its exclusive clientele, the political leverage, the hidden transactions, were the same forces that could bring it crashing down. The rise of the Canfield was a triumph of cunning, but the mansion's story also hinted at the fragility inherent in power built on secrecy and control, setting the stage for the dramatic events that would eventually lead to its fall. The Canfield's downfall was as dramatic and meticulously orchestrated as its rise, a stark reminder that even the most powerful empires can collapse under the weight of their own excess. For years, Richard Canfield had maintained a delicate balance: wealth, influence, and secrecy intertwined to create an almost untouchable fortress. But no structure, no matter how well built, can withstand the combined forces of human ambition, legal scrutiny, and social change indefinitely. The very elements that had propelled the Canfield to legendary status, opulence, discretion, and power, gradually became the factors that undermined it. One of the first cracks appeared in the form of public attention. Newspapers, which had long tiptoed around the mansion's activities, began publishing stories of its opulence and whispered scandals. Journalists were drawn by the magnetic pull of intrigue, sensationalizing every rumor while investigating just enough to unsettle the elite who frequented the mansion. The more people read about the Canfield, the more the illusion of privacy was threatened. Wealthy patrons, once reassured by secrecy, began to worry about reputations, political repercussions, and personal exposure. Invitations became less coveted, and the mansion's carefully curated aura of invincibility started to falter. Legal pressures soon compounded these social anxieties. Regulators, reform-minded politicians, and moral crusaders saw the Canfield as the embodiment of corruption and decadence. Gambling was legal only in limited circumstances, and the mansion had long skirted the edges of legality through loopholes and political influence. Eventually, investigators began to probe more aggressively, questioning the legitimacy of its operations, its ties to influential figures, and the extent of debts and obligations owed to Canfield. Even though Canfield had long insulated himself from direct consequences, the sheer accumulation of scrutiny made him vulnerable. Internal pressures also played a crucial role. Canfield's empire depended on a network of loyal staff and associates who enforced his rules without question. Yet human loyalty is fragile, especially under stress. Some employees began to act in their own self-interest, exploiting knowledge of Canfield's operations for personal gain. Mismanagement, embezzlement, and betrayal eroded the efficiency and discretion that had defined the mansion. The very secrecy that had been a strength became a weakness, as fewer people fully understood the inner workings of the empire, leaving gaps that could be exploited. Financial strain further exacerbated the situation. Canfield's lavish spending on the mansion, the casino, and associated entertainment had always been sustainable because of high-stakes gambling and elite patronage. But as clientele became more cautious and scandals spread, revenue began to decline. The mansion's operating costs, already astronomical, outpaced income. Canfield attempted to adapt by increasing stakes, hosting larger events, and pushing for more exclusive gatherings. But the reputation that had once drawn the elite was now tainted by gossip and growing public scrutiny. The more he tried to maintain appearances, the more precarious his financial position became. Scandals among the mansion's elite visitors also contributed to its collapse. Powerful guests, fearful of exposure, withdrew from participation, sometimes publicly distancing themselves from Canfield's operations. Alliances that had once bolstered his influence began to crumble. Rumors of cheating, secret debts, and illicit activities circulated widely, eroding trust among the remaining clientele. In a world where perception mattered as much as reality, the mansion's image of untouchable luxury began to fracture. Social and cultural shifts of the early 20th century accelerated the mansion's decline. The Gilded Age's appetite for extravagance gave way to reform movements, moral crusades, and stricter oversight of gambling and financial operations. What had once been tolerated or even admired was now seen as a symbol of excess and corruption. Public sentiment shifted, and Canfield's empire, built on secrecy and indulgence, no longer aligned with the prevailing moral climate. Pressure from reformers, combined with economic and legal threats, created an environment in which sustaining the mansion's operations became increasingly impossible. The final blow came from a combination of legal action, public scandal, and internal betrayal. Lawsuits were filed, investigations intensified, and former allies turned against Canfield to protect their own interests. By this point, the mansion's network of secrecy, which had once been its greatest defense, became a liability. Every hidden transaction, every whispered deal, every unrecorded debt was exposed under scrutiny. The Canfield, once untouchable, could no longer shield itself from the consequences of its own excess. Ultimately, the mansion was forced to close, marking the end of an era. The rise and fall of the Canfield serves as a powerful illustration of the transient nature of power, built on indulgence and secrecy. Its story is a cautionary tale. No matter how carefully influence is cultivated, no matter how cleverly wealth is used to manipulate perception, the forces of law, society, and human nature will eventually reclaim balance. The Canfield's legacy, however, endures, a symbol of opulence, ambition, and the fine line between power and downfall, reminding us that the most spectacular empires are often the most fragile. The legacy of the Canfield mansion extends far beyond the gilded walls and glittering chandeliers that once captivated America's elite. Though the mansion itself eventually fell into ruin and its operations ceased, its story continues to fascinate historians, storytellers, and anyone drawn to the interplay of wealth, power, and human ambition. The Canfield was more than a building. It was a symbol of an era, a monument to the Gilded Age's excesses, and a testament to the ways in which influence and secrecy could shape not just fortunes, but lives. Its legacy lies in the lessons it imparts, the legends it spawned, and the cultural imprint it left on American society. One of the most enduring aspects of the Canfield's legacy is how it reshaped the perception of private gambling and elite social spaces. Richard Canfield transformed what had once been seen as a seedy or morally questionable activity into an experience of exclusivity and sophistication. By doing so, he created a blueprint for private, high-stakes entertainment that combined luxury, discretion, and strategic networking. Casinos and private clubs in America and abroad would later adopt elements of his approach: meticulous attention to detail, an emphasis on decorum, and the cultivation of elite clientele whose social and political influence extended far beyond the gaming tables. In this sense, the Canfield was not merely a mansion or a casino. It was an institution that set standards for private leisure that endure even in modern times. The mansion's impact on social history is also profound. Within its walls, the boundaries between wealth, politics, and influence were blurred in ways that few other places allowed. Decisions made at card tables, conversations held behind velvet curtains, and favors exchanged in private rooms affected the lives of thousands outside Saratoga Springs. In this way, the Canfield serves as a window into the hidden mechanisms of power during the Gilded Age. It reminds us that history is often shaped not just by public actions, but by private negotiations, secret alliances, and the subtle manipulation of perception and desire. Moreover, the Canfield left a rich cultural legacy through the stories and legends it inspired. Writers, journalists, and storytellers have long been captivated by its combination of glamour, secrecy, and moral ambiguity. Tales of high-stakes games, scandalous affairs, and whispered political deals continue to appear in historical accounts and popular media, painting a vivid picture of the mansion's influence and allure. The mansion has come to symbolize the paradox of the Gilded Age: extraordinary wealth and sophistication intertwined with corruption, secrecy, and moral compromise. Its story resonates because it reflects both the human fascination with luxury and power and the inevitable consequences that accompany their misuse. Architecturally, the Canfield left an imprint as well. While the mansion itself no longer stands, its design, grandeur, and meticulous attention to detail influenced subsequent constructions in Saratoga Springs and similar resort towns. The combination of elegance, functionality, and secrecy created a template for spaces that catered to the powerful yet protected their privacy. Beyond bricks and mortar, the mansion's careful orchestration of space, from private gaming rooms to hidden passageways, demonstrated how architecture could serve not just aesthetic purposes, but also social and strategic ones. This integration of design with influence is a lesson still studied in historical architecture and urban planning. The human element of the Canfield's legacy is equally significant. Richard Canfield himself became a symbol of ingenuity, ambition, and the fine line between ethical entrepreneurship and exploitation. His ability to read people, manipulate perception, and create a controlled environment where power, money, and secrecy converged offers a timeless study of strategy and influence. Yet his story also serves as a cautionary tale. No matter how clever or powerful one becomes, empires built on secrecy, indulgence, and moral compromise are inherently vulnerable. The mansion's collapse and Canfield's decline highlight the fragility of human ambition when it is not tempered by foresight, ethics, or transparency. Finally, the Canfield endures in the collective memory as a story of aspiration, excess, and consequence. It reminds us that the allure of power and wealth can be intoxicating, but unchecked ambition inevitably carries risk. The mansion's rise and fall illustrate how societal structures, human behavior, and historical context intersect to create both legendary achievements and spectacular downfalls. Even today, when historians, writers, or curious travelers look back at Saratoga Springs, the Canfield Mansion occupies a unique place, a symbol of what was possible in an age of extravagance, and a cautionary tale of the limits of ambition. In the end, the Canfield's true legacy lies not in its walls or its wealth, but in the enduring fascination it inspires. Its story continues to captivate because it encompasses every human drama: power, ambition, greed, secrecy, and downfall. It teaches lessons about influence, strategy, and the consequences of indulgence that remain relevant centuries later. The Canfield is a reminder that history is shaped as much by hidden corridors and whispered deals as by public events, and that the echo of a grand empire, even in ruin, can continue to resonate far beyond its time.